Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem 292, If Your Nerve Deny You. Now, the great scholar David Priest has commented that this poem should probably be called, although Emily never, of course, titled her poetry, Fortitude, that is to say resilience. Some would call it courage, right? In some ways, we're back to poem 252 in our study, I Can Wade Grief. Now, this is in some ways another theodicy poem. That is to say, can you explain why there must be pain and suffering in this world? And when we encounter it, how exactly is it that we are supposed to respond to it? Some have called this a wisdom poem, and certainly some of you guys will probably say that makes some sense given what she argues. Now, our assumptions here are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've worked through as well our preceding 291 poems. We just finished with 291, How the Old Mountains Drip. Now, if you've done that, you know that the sentiment that we're going to encounter here, we have heard before. In other words, Emily's going to make the argument that yes, things happen that we will constitute as pain, suffering. The question isn't why did it happen to me, but rather why did it happen for me. That capacity to change the 2 to 4 will be for Emily a powerful tool in how to live one's life. And in that regards, we might argue here that Emily is the Stoic. Certainly we're going to see some evidences of the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus, no doubt. Now, some have read this as a religious poem, others as more a spiritual poem, and certainly those are not exclusive to each other. And in some ways as well, the goal here is to try to prepare for that final moment of death. Here, though, notice in this poem that it isn't God who technically motivates one, but rather the grave itself. To be steady will be her word. Now, of course, we have pointed this out many times in 303. You have not met any 200-year-old people, which is a powerful observation insight that, of course, they taught it to us when we were children, right? We're swinging at the park. We want to swing longer, and we're told we have to go to the van. No, honey, you cannot swing forever at the park. You only get to swing for a very brief period of time. And because that's the case, i.e. the grave, as she will say it, then why not swing well? Why not do the best that you can? That is to say, let's enjoy a poem that suggests you got to stand up to the suffering and the pain that's in front of you. This is how she says it. If your nerve deny you, go above your nerve. He can lean against the grave if he fear to swerve. That's a steady posture, never any bend, held of those brass arms best giant made. If your soul seesaw, lift the flesh door. The poltroon wants oxygen, nothing more. Now, notice the construction that begins with the word if, right? And we're going to see it now 2 more times. If your nerve, if he fear, again, if your soul. In other words, it's speculative. And what is it that she says? Well, many have pointed out that the word nerve can be, quote, physically the biological nerve, but can also obviously mean courage and the like. By the way, when we get to poem 341, she'll play the game this way. After great pain, a formal feeling comes. The nerves sit ceremonious like tombs. The stiff heart questions, was it he that bore? And yesterday, or centuries before, the feet mechanical go round, of ground, or air, or aught, a wooden way, regardless grown, a quartz contentment like a stone. This is the hour of lead, remembered if outlived, as freezing persons recollect the snow, first chill, then stupor, then the letting go. And when we meet that poem, we'll come back to this poem. We'll see, obviously, the connection here. If your nerve deny you, in other words, it fails you, in other words, your courage, go above your nerve. Transcend, right? I mean, if ever you want a poem that makes the argument that Emily Dickinson is a transcendentalist, here it is, right? Go above your nerve. She could be arguing go above your nature, go above your biology. In other words, fear is natural. Why is it that there are some who will run towards the challenges as opposed to running from the challenges? This is the goal, right? Then she'll say it. Your nerve can lean against the grave. Note the irony, to lean against the gate, right? Lean against the grave. If he fear to swerve. Now, this use of the word swerve is fascinating. We'll see it in two other poems we'll study. In poem 556, she'll play the game this way, and I like her use of this word in 556 as well. The brain, within its groove, runs evenly and true, but let a splinter swerve, 'twere easier for you to put a current back when floods had slit the hills and scooped a turnpike for themselves and trodden out the mills. It's once you start to swerve, it's hard to bring it back. And you know, this I think is a powerful collective read here next to this poem. And when we get to poem 573, she'll play the idea of swerve this way. The test of love is death. Our Lord so loved, it saith, what largest lover hath, another doth. If smaller patience be, through less infirmity, if bravo, sometimes swerve, through fainter nerve. Accept its most, and overlook the dust, last, least, the cross, request. We'll enjoy that poem when we come to it, 573. She'll say it this way. If your nerve deny you, go above your nerve. He can lean against the grave if he fear to swerve. There's a steady posture. Now, I think this is pure Emily, and I think this is the goal. Can you be in the middle of the storm steady? When your nerve begins to deny you, can you be steady? There's a steady posture. Never any bend. Notice we go from swerve to bend, yes? Held of those brass arms. Again, there's a reason many read this as a religious poem. Held of those brass, notice capitalized, arms, best giant made. And again, giant capitalized as well. In other words, there is a response to the pain and suffering of our life, to not, in fact, run from it, but rather runs towards it. Yes, meet it. And then she'll finish with one more if. If your soul, notice we go from your nerve to your soul now. Some have read this as body to mind. That is to say, body to soul, right? The distinction between the two. If your soul seesaw, by the way, we'll see seesawing in poem 971, lift the flesh door. Now, many have been made uncomfortable by this line, lift the flesh door. In other words, yes, you are a body, flesh, but you're also a mind. If you can somehow see behind the curtain called the flesh, the body, behind there is the soul. And the soul will, if trained well, find a way to the steady posture. If your soul seesaw, lift the flesh door, and then she'll make a powerful argument against those who don't practice this kind of stoic ideal. The poltron wants oxygen. Poltron. In Emily's dictionary, poltron was actually defined as, quote, arrogant coward, comma, a wretch without spirit or courage. That will be for her. The poltron note is capitalized. And want here meaning need, as in from her understanding of the 23rd Psalm, the Lord, King James Version, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That is to lack. So in other words, what is it that the poltron hopes only for? Oxygen. I cannot help but think of Tennyson's Ulysses as though to breathe were life. Life piled on life for all too little, he says, and of one to me little remains. But every hour saved from that eternal silence something more, a bringer of new things, and violent work for some three sons, to store and hoard myself in this grey spirit, yearning and desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought. That poem is a great analog reading, I think, to what she's saying here. The poltron wants oxygen. That's all the coward needs. And then, of course, the powerful final line, nothing more. And of course, this nothing will obviously take us to that idea of the essentials that Thoreau will ask about in Walden 1, won't he? When he says, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts. And of course, he says, I did not wish to live that which was not life. Living is too dear. And I think that's our point here at 2A. Courage is necessary. I think Emily is arguing for what? The great life? Certainly, I think she would argue the great poet, the great artist. Freedom always is associated with acts of courage. At 2B, I love the word choice from that nerve would represent as courage. I love the idea of swerving to bending. At 3A, we've obviously mentioned any number of titles already. I want to think about Dante, because I think Dante stands behind much of this poem as well. You remember, Dante the Pilgrim is going through the experience of first Inferno, then of course Purgatorio, and finally Paradiso in the Divine Commedia. But remember in the Inferno, as we studied it before, at Canto 24, he's so tired and he sits down and he says, I'm done. And what is it that the guide Virgil says to Dante the Pilgrim? Up on your feet. This is no time to tire. The man who lies asleep will never wake and fade, and his desire will drift past him like ripples on a stream. I think certainly she's channeling that idea. What did Dante argue? You don't go to hell, you go through hell. That is the fundamental, I think, reading of Dante's Divine Comedy. And we've given full lectures at learnstrong.net for those of you that like to run that one to ground. Finally, to own a poem like this, 3B. What was a time in your life when you can remember that your nerve didn't swerve? And for that, you were grateful. I'm hopeful that maybe your study of Emily will help you to not swerve. Thank you.